I'm with you. Whatever you need, I'm with you.
Yeah. So first 5 minutes is just me trying to figure this out.
Listen, we're going to talk a lot about being kind to ourselves and stuff like that. This is a pretty good,
right. Yeah. This is
real life start to that.
And cool. Well, kind of kick it off here. For those of you, most everybody doesn't know. So this is my therapist, Ryan Marone here on my podcast, Champion's Way. This is dedicated for helping divorced dads specifically. So been working with Ryan for, almost 2 years now, right? It's been
wild how that happens. But yeah, I think it's somewhere in that timeline.
Yeah. We're coming up on 2 years in October, and it's, you've helped me through a lot, to say the least. So I'll kind of let you kind of give a little bit of background about yourself, and we'll take it from there.
Okay. So Ryan Mirrione, licensed mental health counselor in the state of Florida. Licensed for about 4 years, in the field for about 7 or 8, depending if you count internships and stuff, because that basically is the same thing. And also licensed in New Jersey. That's what the LPC is. Basically the same thing, just different state. But as far as experience goes, I've been blessed to have a pretty wide range of jobs in the field, where I started in treatment and addiction, then I moved over and actually worked in a treatment and addiction recovery program, in a federal prison. And then I moved over and actually worked with kids under 18 for about a year. So I've been blessed to kind of have a wide spectrum of jobs, wide spectrum of responsibilities to kind of get a full idea of the needs. So I feel pretty good about when we come on here and talk about different topics and things like that. It helps me work some muscles that maybe I haven't worked in a while. So yeah, I'm looking forward to it. So
yeah, I appreciate you being on here. Obviously, this is the second time we've been together here. This go around a little bit different. I think before we had talked about anger and men, which is what we discussed last time. This time, we're going to go over, I think the topics we had kind of thrown out was just the transition for men in going through divorce, right? If I remember correctly.
Sure. And I think the idea was more so just like to kind of bring in the idea of like sense of self and how like roles in life change that idea of sense of self and like what to look out for, how that could be healthy, unhealthy, things like that.
Yeah. I think, it's obviously it's an important topic, and I hope my goal with this is to provide value to the group here, and for you guys to have some really good takeaways from Ryan, because obviously he's helped me out a ton here, and hopefully you can provide some insights for you guys, and we'll jump in. So going through any sort of major transition in life is always it shocks the system, mentally, emotionally, physically. In your experience, what have you seen as kind of the things that typically end up happening, and best practices? I think let's start there and see where it takes us.
And as far as like the transition from married to divorced and what that looks like, and kind of some of
I mean, why not, like from living a life with being around kids all the time, and married to now being a divorced dad, and not being around your kids a lot, and not having that everyday interaction, and just the whole shift of life of having been with somebody for a good amount of time, to now essentially in many cases having to start over, ranging anywhere from people in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and I've even seen 70s.
Yeah, and it's interesting because typically our sense of self develops over time. Like I know for me, my sense of self, who I was, what mattered to me, what I cared about. If you asked me when I was 16, you asked me now at 32, it's vastly different. What we don't really prepare ourselves for is that sense of self shifting when a big life change happens. I think we all kind of understand over time there's going to be some development, but when it's a big, like you said, shock to the system, it's a big shift. A lot of the things that made us who we are, or who we believe that we are, kind of all get shaken up all at once. I think when it comes to marriage and obviously parenthood and things like that, when anything changes in that world, the idea of who you are, I think, starts to become very confusing for people. We as humans kind of have a tendency to start to identify ourselves by our roles in life. What we do. What's the first thing? Almost every time you meet somebody, especially when it's male to male, what's almost the question everybody asks. So what do you do?
Yeah.
Right? As if it's like some type of like name tag for us, some type of portal into who we are. Now, there are some jobs, there are some roles where that they intertwine with who we are. But any role in life that we start to identify ourselves by as who we are rather than what we are has a lot more kind of emotional equity for us. And the role of husband or the role of father, obviously, for all the roles in life, these are going to have major, major, major effects on that. So that's typically what I see. I think what people tend to forget is that just because you may leave a particular role, like say for divorce, obviously, you go from husband to no longer, holding that title, holding that role, the values that you held as a husband, the things that made it important to you can still come with you, right? In therapy, I know, we talk a lot about the idea of we always try to operate from the inside out. So what matters to me? What do I value most in this world? What if you if you pulled my soul open, what would you find? And how do I bring it out into the world instead of going outward and try to bring it in, right? So the values that are important to you as a husband can stay after divorce. Those don't get left behind. You take you everywhere you go, right? So if it's the value of supporting someone, it's the value of having a partner in life, the value of being emotionally vulnerable, the value of growing together. These values don't have to leave just because the role left. And I think that's the part where we typically start. It's like, how do you take that stuff with you? Because they're not just stapled to that relationship and to that part of your life. So that's typically where we start.
Yeah, I think that's a huge thing because there's so many people like you talk about the identity piece and then leaving that behind, and what that does to really the soul. I don't think there's a person that doesn't go through it where there isn't just a massive shift. And I think that's a crucial point to be able to understand that the values that you have in one aspect of life or relationship or anywhere can still transfer with you. And I think a lot of people will almost subjugate it to just that part.
Yes.
Yes.
It's not exclusive to that role in life, right? Those values can come out a lot in that role in life. They can show up a lot in that role in life, but they're not mutually exclusive, right? So for instance, just the idea of just like having somebody to grow with. Yes, in a romantic setting that has its own place in this world, but the value of growing with people doesn't have to just begin and end in a marriage. You can grow with a colleague, you can grow with a friend, you can grow with a family member, right? That value can stay with you. Yeah, it's going to have to get applied to different parts of your life. It's going to be an adjustment, We talk a lot in therapy. Comparison is the thief of joy. So the whole idea is you don't want to try to compare what the value represented in that part of your world to what it can represent everywhere else. But you can still find those values in other places. You just have to be intentional about it, right? They don't have to be buried in the past, and now you have to create a whole nother sense of self. Take it with you. The ultimate autonomy in life is when you decide that everything that matters to you comes with you everywhere you go, right? And you can kind of apply that to almost everything in life if you're intentional about it. And I think when a big major role change happens in life, obviously in this instance we're talking about marriage, but whether it be a job, I have clients who work in the same place for 40 years and now they got to make a shift, whether it be some type of passion that they can no longer do anymore. Like if I have someone who was an athlete and no longer can do that at the capacity that they used to, the values that matter to you in that role don't have to just leave when you can't be in that role the same way anymore. And that's such a big kind of shift in our mentality that can really, truly open up a lot of doors for us.
It is. I think it's a huge reframe because it is. I think the other thing is, do you come across guys or anybody in general that taking that perspective and carrying it over into another part of life, having had values attached to a certain thing. Now we're in this new life where we have to almost find new things to, I guess you could say, define values. Does that tend to be a problem for some people sometimes?
Sure. Typically, when we look at it, it's interesting because it's not a question. I think typically, if you're not in therapy, you're not actively looking at it. It's not something that we always reflect on. I think it's something that we built up over time, and we kind of just make decisions based on it. But we don't realize that it's really a lot of times from a value system. So it's not even so much redefining your values; it's rediscovering them again. Mm-hmm. Typically, when I work with clients, especially in that part of life, a little older, a little more mature, they've kind of developed these things over time, but forgot to look at them with the same intensity that maybe we look at them when we're 17, 18, 19 years old and we're trying to develop all these things. So if a divorce happens and that big shift comes in life, it's not so much that we have to work on redefining what they are. We have to just go look for them again, because so many things in life, so much noise shows up that we forget to be intentional about these things again. So it's not so much about a definition problem. It's more of just an intentionality problem because they're still there and they're still typically relatively defined. We have to just rediscover them again. And what we have to now redefine is how we're going to use them differently. Because maybe we can't use them in that way anymore as a husband. So maybe we have to use them more as a coworker or as a friend or as a brother, right? Maybe these values are going to get applied in different places now, but it's not so much redefining that value. It's just finding them and then kind of applying them out into the world. It's typically where the shift comes.
Is there maybe people that are, because I feel like people do this consciously and subconsciously, because I feel like this is where a lot of people trip up and, lean towards different vices and other bad decisions where it's essentially, they may not know that they value this connection and this closeness, and now that that's gone, then they reach for a vice, something like that, and they make a decision that maybe they would otherwise regret. Is this kind of that moment where you typically see those slip ups in these situations?
Yeah, anything could kind of move us in a direction where we start to choose old solutions or unhealthy solutions. Is this one of them? For sure. Because again, it comes back to that idea of like, typically it becomes a lot more unhealthy when we start working from the outside in. So if you start looking for comfort outside of you, which would be typically in those vices, right? That's a solution outside of you. The difficult thing with that, Sam, is that what you're looking for in those external solutions, you'll find in the moment a lot of the times, right? Everything typically serves a function for people if they choose it. They don't just do it for no reason. So even if it is a vice, and even if we know consciously it's not the healthiest of choices, if that's the only solution we have in that moment and we know it's going to give us what we want in that moment, we might still grab for it, right? That's why we work so hard at operating from the inside out, because when you look for the outside in solutions, typically it's a lot emptier. It's more instant rather than a full delayed gratification. You still have to deal with all the consequences that come with it. So even if it gives you what you want in that moment, typically when we work from the outside in, it actually moves you farther apart over time from what you really want. So something like that, exactly like you said, all of those healthy values that you hold, that inside out mentality, so much of that energy was going into your marriage. Now that marriage is not there anymore, we're not sure where to put it. So maybe we go back to some old negative solutions that were more outside in. So I think that is something to definitely look out for when there's a big shift like this.
What are some, best practices that, guys could use in these moments when they're going through that transition? You have those temptations to go back and, or not even go back, but just solve it with not doing the work internally and everything we were just kind of going over.
So once you say that, the first thing that I think of, and it's a saying that they use in AA and they use in the rooms. It's something I learned as being a therapist in that world for a while. And they use the term play the tape out. And I've always found that to be a very, very powerful, mechanism to help us. Because what that means is if you're going to reach for something, whatever that may be, that doesn't have to be like a traditional vice. It doesn't have to be a substance. Like there are vices when it comes to relationships. There is unhealthy binds there. There is vices as far as codependency goes. It's not just the traditional stuff. But the whole idea is that, especially if you've already identified that this is a negative solution, it's not the most helpful thing, you play the tape out, right? It's not just about the moment when you engage in the vice and the relief that you may get. Play the whole tape out. What does the whole movie look like? What does after look like? What does 10 minutes look like? What does an hour look like? What does a week after look like? And if you play that tape out and everything after is more negative rather than positive, maybe this is not something we want to grab for, right? In cognitive behavioral therapy, which is kind of the modality that I typically operate from, we always look for cognitive distortions, right? Which is basically just like a nerdy way of saying thinking errors, right? Things that are instant gratification, things that may be a quick solution but not a delayed gratification thing, typically fall somewhere in that cognitive distortion realm, right? Where your mind kind of warps what that is that vice is actually going to give you, so you can only see right then. So if you play the tape out, typically you can combat that thought and realize that maybe this is more of a distortion rather than an actual solution. So you got to give yourself a shot, right? You got to give yourself a chance to truly see it for what it is rather than what it could be for a few moments. And that typically,
that's what I was wondering, because like even I feel like sometimes we get caught up in the moment, and even playing that tape out, we get so wrapped up in the moment and the emotion that playing the tape out really doesn't matter, you know. And I know a lot of times it's, you know, when you're in a place of just mental and emotional pain, it's hard to go out that far, you know, and have to sit in that moment. What are some best practices, I guess, on that note, that when you're in those moments of pain and frustration or anger, whatever it may be, fill in the blank, right? To where playing that tape out is just looks way too fucking hard.
Everything, I think, interestingly, it's cool because a lot of the stuff ties in. Interestingly, I think we talked a lot about this when we spoke about anger the first time you and I spoke on a platform like this. Is every single emotion that you've ever had in your entire life is just a visitor, right? They are not states of being. They are visiting, okay? Some with more intensity, some with more longevity that we may like, but it is visiting. So if you give yourself time and change your relationship with what you're experiencing and treat it as a visitor rather than a state of being, it becomes a lot easier to navigate it, right? Once we start to identify by it, I am sad, I am mad, instead of I'm experiencing sadness or I'm experiencing anger and stuff like that. You're typically going to look for something to try to grab you and pull you out of it, instead of realizing that it's just visiting you. And every solution you have is internal, right? It is just visiting. So you have to look for things that help you navigate this thing rather than pull you from it. So that's typically what will help in those areas. A lot of times with things like this, the intensity of these emotions can be so heavy that we're going to reach for the most instant of solutions. We're going to reach for something to escape the thing rather than navigate the thing, right? But if you identify by it and it becomes your state of being in those moments, it's a lot harder to navigate it, right? Because you, like we talked about before, you take you everywhere you go. So you have to externalize it. You're experiencing these emotions. You are not them, right?
Yeah.
So we have all kinds of, reframing cognitive solutions that help with that. We have grounding solutions for more people that feel it more in their body rather than their mind. It's just certain things, certain coping mechanisms that we can put into place to help us navigate the visitor rather than to try to run from it.
So it's all, whether it be reframing techniques, a lot of these other different things to help. Essentially, we're identifying that this emotion isn't us. And if we identify with that emotion, that's where we start to run into issues. So if we understand that the emotion is just a temporary thing, and we use different techniques such as a reframing or different other things to help combat that. So what you're saying is that can help alleviate some of that immediate internal pain that we may be experiencing in the moment, wherever those emotions may be.
Yes. And we always talk about in therapy, it's not to be void of these things. To be human, to live and breathe, you're going to feel a wide spectrum of emotion, good, bad, and indifferent, right? It's not to not experience them. It's not to be void of them. It's to give yourself the ability to identify them and navigate them as best you can. So many people come into therapy and their first thing is, I just want to be happy. But happiness is not a state of being.
Right.
It's an emotion, like anything else. So the goal, it's not that we don't try to experience happiness. That's a wonderful thing. But the goal is to experience happiness with more frequency and duration and intensity, to invite it in more, not to be there. There is no threshold to step over where you just walk into happiness and this is now your state of being, right? It's to invite it in as much as we can, right? Yeah. Because happiness, like any other emotion, is also a visitor. We just want it to visit more than maybe some of the other ones. So we put things in place to help that, to open those doors up. But if we're going to look at the negative emotions as visitors, and we're going to work through that kind of thinking process, we have to do the same for the positive ones as well, right? We can't dip the scales just for comfort purposes, right? They are all visitors. It's not a state of being. It's not a destination. It's something we experience.
Yeah. It's so funny that the happiness piece, I always laugh at people like, I just want to be happy. I just want to be happy. That's cool, but you can't, like, chemically, we can't be happy all the time too as well. Like, our biochemistry isn't going to allow that. You know, it's just
No, and it's identifying by an emotion. Nobody is happy. Some people just experience more than others.
mhm.
Some people are more present and are able to lean into it more than others, right? Some people show it more externally than others, but nobody is it. Just like nobody is sad or is angry, right? They experience these things maybe more frequently than others. We want to externalize these things. They're just visiting, right? It's really, really, really hard to navigate an emotional state and difficulty when you identify by it. So to get back to your original question about like how do we help ourselves, like if the idea of playing the tape out is just too much and we want instant relief now, remember you're trying to find instant permanent relief from a temporary problem. So treat it as such. It is a temporary visitor. Put things in place to help you navigate that thing. That you can do, right? Always come back to what you can control. You can't make yourself feel something, but you can influence how you think about it. And if you influence how you think about it in a positive way, your emotions many times will come with it. That part's up to you.
Yeah, it is. It's powerful because no, not to go back, but just keep rehashing it. When you're in those moments, it can seem so daunting to just have to be there. You know what I mean? Like there's so many times where like you just wanted to just leave and it just to be over.
Yes.
You know, and I think there's because I always, you know, you and I talk. I always trying to take everything as a learning situation
Sure.
in some capacity, and I feel like that is one of the best ways to do it. Even you know, because I watched something I was the other day on the social media where the guy was talking about like we want all of these great characteristics, but in order to get to those characteristics, we have to go through some degree of pain, suffering, or whatever to go through that to get to that point. We all want, but we don't understand the price that has to be paid to get to that.
Everything worth everything in life, Sam, has sacrifice.
Yep.
You know, it's some risk in it. That's why I love the values conversation. That's why I'm glad we talked about it today, because what we do get a choice on is what you sacrifice and risk for. And if you can do that, if you sacrifice and risk for the things that you value most in life, you got a real shot to put yourself in a healthier place, right? We cannot guarantee results in a lot of things in life, but we can influence them by what we made the decision based on, right? So to get all the way back to why we started the conversation today, you get a choice after a major life event like a divorce to still make choices based on who you want to be, even if what you are has changed, right? If you go from husband to single, what you are has changed, but who you are doesn't have to. We really do have a choice on that. It just takes hard work, you know? The therapist always has the luxury of talking about that from an unbiased place. I realize it is much easier said than done to say, hey, you can still be who you are and who you want to be even after a divorce than actually doing it. I'm very aware of the fact that actually doing that is much, much harder than just the idea, right? But if you operate from that place and you're intentional about that, you can find yourself and you can find what you need and you can move forward in life and still be who you want to be, even if what you are has changed to some degree. It just takes work. It's like working like any other muscle.
Yeah. What are some other things that you tend to see come up for guys when they're going through divorce and they're losing that sense of self?
So depending on what the relationship was like, we have a term. So there's forget his first name. I don't think they really care about first names when they teach you about different psychologists and stuff. But his last name was Bowen. Bowen is like the godfather of like the family therapy and relationships. That's Bowenian theory. He talks a lot about what's called enmeshment. And I talk about this with clients even that are still in relationships, whether it be marriages, engaged, boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever it may be. Enmeshment is when you start to lose your sense of self in a relationship and everything is just we and us. That might sound all well and good and kind of like Disney movie like. And then
that sounds so like, the fairy tale, you know what I mean?
Yes. There's nothing with there being some we in us, of course, right? We grow together, but there has to be an I, a you, and a we. There's three entities in that. So for individuals that were in a marriage that was more kind of based on the enmeshment and everything is we and us, you start to lose your sense of self. Now, again, it's similar to what we talked about before, where it's not like you've lost your definition of your values. You just stopped looking for them. You stopped operating from that place, right? You started to operate from are all the time. So individuals that leave a relationship like that tend to have a little more difficulty reestablishing their sense of self. So that's a cautionary thing both ways. That's a cautionary thing. If you find that you're in a relationship now where you find that's more the case, find what it's called self-differentiation, right? Find who you are within the relationship, not just we and us. It's very, very healthy to do so. It doesn't mean you completely separate. Doesn't mean there isn't some we and us. Doesn't mean there isn't mutual growth. It's a major, major part of this. But you have to leave time and space for your own personal growth within it. Because a lot of times people rely on their partner to do that for them. So after a divorce may happen or something major may happen in that regard, if you're operating from a we and us and that we and us doesn't exist anymore, you feel like you're out in space, grasping for who you were. Does not mean we cannot come back and can't find it, because we absolutely can. So it is not like some type of doomsday thing, but it does sometimes become a little more difficult to get back to that. Because the less intentional you are from operating from that place, the harder it is to rediscover it. But it does not mean it's not there. It doesn't mean you need to redefine who you are. You just got to find it again. So that is something I typically see that maybe adds a little more distress to a situation like this. Some relationships are not this way, and they have a healthy sense of you, me, and then us. So when a divorce happens, there might not be that big of an adjustment because they've already continued to work on that sense of self.
Yeah.
Doesn't minimize what they're experiencing. It's still obviously a very painful thing. But the journey back to, hey, these are my values and I can still apply them to other places in my life, maybe with a little less resistance that way. But that is something that I do see sometimes.
So you're saying, like the enmeshment, is that what you said?
Enmeshment, yes.
Enmeshment.
Don't ask me to spell it because I won't get it.
So what you're saying is, so with that we and us thing, where there's essentially, and you hear this oftentimes, where people forget they feel like they lost themselves in a relationship and then they're out and then they're no longer with them. It doesn't even happen with divorce people just dating in general. You hear this oftentimes. So what you're saying is, like, in those moments, the journey back to those values can tend to take longer.
Yeah, whether it's longer, whether there's more doubt of what those actually are, whether if there's some resistance to it, might not be longer. That all depends. Therapy very rarely operates on timelines for things. There's no typical amount of time we're supposed to get somewhere in therapy.
Yeah.
It's about growth, movement, direction, these types of things. So yeah, it could take longer, but typically there's even like more resistance to it. Typically they forgot to differentiate between what were my values and what were the values we decided were ours. You ever had anybody in your life, Sam, that kind of takes on the personality of their partner?
I mean, I've seen it. Yeah.
Yeah. That's typically where the struggle really is. Because then, again, it's so important to remember this, though. It's not that it needs to be redefined or it's completely gone or like it never was developed. It's like you got to dig it back up type of thing.
Yep.
I think people think like, all right, I don't know who I am anymore. That's more of a doubt thing rather than a lack of understanding thing. We can find it again. You develop that at some point in your life. Now, some people have doubt and some social anxieties where they took on their personalities of other people and stuff like that. So we can work through all of this stuff as well. But you had some layer of sense of self before that relationship, and you can rediscover it again after. That doesn't, go out to the abyss.
Yeah, I think it is the thing that I've noticed too is as you get older, because it's so funny. I remember being 19 years old, and I was sitting in a dorm room with my roommate at the time. And we were talking about like adults, and like at 19, your mental, I don't know, the mental fluidity in which you can kind of change and operate different tasks and thought processes is so much easier.
Yes, a lot more latitude.
And I remember sitting there with my roommate and being like, yeah, like if you just don't want to do it, you just don't do it. And then as you get older, like as you've established like behavioral patterns and emotional patterns,
yes,
and it becomes ingrained in you. you realize, like, I laugh at myself. I still do. As you can see this, I'm laughing at myself at that comment. Because as you get older, it becomes harder and harder to
Yes.
switch tasks that easily and
Yes.
and hop out of that.
We've built up so many core beliefs, so many judgments about things and stuff like that, that it takes a while to swim through them sometimes. That's what therapy is all about. Over our lifetime, you develop a certain unique layer of core beliefs about you and the world, right? Every one of us has our own unique layers of that. Some are very positive and some are very helpful, some are not. So cognitive behavioral therapy, where I operate from, is trying to find and locate the ones that are not and changing your relationship with those, right? Not getting rid of them, because it is your understanding of things. They don't just go away, but you can change your relationship with them, right? When we're 17, 18, 19 years old, those aren't so strong and firm. So we're a little more malleable,
Yeah.
Typically, as you get older, they become more firm. So the ones that are painful, the ones that are hurtful to us, sometimes have a lot more punch and a lot more power. And that's a hard thing to break out of. And after a divorce, if you have some core beliefs about I'm not enough or I'll never be lovable, stuff like that, and then something like that happens and you start to think that confirms now those negative core beliefs, that could be a hard thing to move through. And that's where the work comes in. These, again, a lot of times are distortions and thinking errors, but they're built on past experience and they're built on certain understanding of certain circumstances that you might have happened when you were 14 and you developed this core belief. You took it as truth, and now you're 32 years old and that's still truth to you, but maybe it's not really truth. Maybe it's just how you felt in that moment and it got kind of crystallized as truth for you. We got to work through that stuff.
Yeah, I think to keep even pull back from what we were talking about before, right? Is if you get out of a relationship and you're right, maybe rediscover, maybe you know those values, maybe you don't understand those values as well, and that's where either way there's that pain that's going to be there, and we have those tendencies to reach for those quick solutions as opposed to understanding and reframing a lot of things like we talked about. And oh man, from end of the day here, we're brain's drawing a blank here, but speaking of not operating mentally with mental clarity,
It'll find you.
But being able to understand that the emotion that you're experiencing, right, is just temporary. It's not an identity, and to keep to move towards those values that you have. And it's just, I think that I know the thing for me is it was just becoming more patient with a lot of this stuff and allowing it to just kind of understand that each time. I think the other thing too, when it comes to the mental and emotional switch that happens within your brain, for me, it was always easier for having had experience with workout and having to take time, dedication, and consistency with that to understand that the brain is going to be the same way. And as much as evolutionarily, we want the instant gratification, no matter how much you identify with delayed gratification and your ability and willingness to grind and move forward through all this stuff, like the brain still wants that.
Yes. Every time we mindlessly pull our phone out of our pocket and don't even realize why is the evolutionary instant gratification at work, brother. That's such a great example of all this, Sam, because it's who I know you to be, right? It's one of your core values, the things that matter so much to you is like sweat equity and like an inner locus of control of like you earn what you get and you work towards what you get, right? And in your situation, when you decided that is how you were going to operate from this place, right? Patience, delayed gratification, do the right things now so I get what I need later, rather than how can I instantly feel comfort, is when our work started to really take off, right? Yeah. Such a great example of exactly what we're talking about here is you came back to a permanent thing is what you value in life, not an instant temporary thing of what's going to make me feel better right now. The permanent, this is what I value, this is what I care about, comes with you always, right? Will always be there. You could always operate from that place. Yeah, but I kind of want to go this way because I'll just feel better right now. It's temporary. It's a moment, maybe, right? It's much more empty. It's much less sustainable. When you came back to things that truly matter to you, right? Like you said, putting in the work, waiting for the results later, and more delayed gratification mentality, things change, man.
I think it's, if we're talking about ways to help with the transition, is I think there is an element. I mean, you know me, like I always like to kind of take the good and even if there's an element of bad. And I think, there's concept of masculinity, right? There's society's going to talk bad about certain parts of whatever, but regardless, at the end of the day, the concept of being masculine is delayed gratification. It is putting in the work. And I think even if you're struggling to find those values, going back to that masculine sense of who somebody is from a man's standpoint, to be able to just use that delayed gratification and put in the work, that'll help bridge that gap to coming to those values and getting to those points.
Yes, that muscle can still be worked, and that can still be applied, even if it feels like an emotional problem. Because again, that emotion is just a visitor, but that value is permanent. So which one would you rather operate from? That's what we always want to get back to, right? Again, much easier said than done. This is why the human experience is so difficult, because we are emotional beings, and these are hard things to navigate. That's always what we want to come back to, right? Salvation lies within. The values stay. So if you can come back to that as an anchor to make your decisions and to help guide you, rather than what you may be feeling in this moment that could be gone in 10 minutes, much more permanent, sustainable solutions, right? Emotions are a complicated thing because every one of them is valid. Nobody has ever felt the wrong thing. You don't get a choice on that, right? But identifying them and navigating is what's up to us, right? And you make a choice just simply based on alleviating that emotion that is just a visitor, rather than making a choice on what you value most in life. You will be compromised. That's the difficult battle when big major changes happen.
Yeah, it is. I mean, because then you talked even about emotions. And you've already talked about the experiences in life that give you those perceptions and those beliefs, and that ultimately does shape your values. But I think that's one of the things when it comes to the human journey of just life, is being able to have the tools to work through some of those things and understanding what should you prioritize versus what you shouldn't. And so many times we get caught up and emotionally preoccupy ourselves with thoughts and emotions and feelings, and we have all these ups and downs, but it's almost like that, again, our brain's wired to do a lot of these things evolutionarily, and we're really trying to work against evolution. And I heard a quote from a podcast a few months ago, and he said, human beings are designed to be born, learn a task, become great at it, and repeat it for the rest of their life and die. And as I've gotten older, I've realized if I look at life in general, it becomes harder and harder to master a task as you get older, because your brain is set to learn something at a younger age.
Yes.
And then repeat that. Like, think of like a blacksmith, right? When they're years ago, right? They would learn their trade and they would just repeat that for their entire life. And that's what they would do. And they'd be really, really good at it, but that would be it. But that's kind of getting to like a utopia type of thing where it's like doing your role in society. You know what I mean? Like, but that's how our brains are almost like kind of evolutionarily wired. So when you're in a relationship and then that's gone and we don't have, our brains are wired to that, even though like if we've lost values, or even if you have your values, there's still a piece of that that's just your brain doesn't mesh as well. Like going through those type of things are a lot harder as an adult than they are as a teenager or in your 20s or whatever, maybe early 20s or whatever it may be.
Yes. Because there were so many years of putting that wiring in, and now we're going to try to rewire. I'm a very, very big believer. This is one of the reframes I try to use with clients a lot. I'm a big believer that clients don't come to me, or people don't come to me broken. I'm a very big believer in not using that terminology. We are not broken, right? I'm not here to fix. We need rewiring. Things got crossed along the way that are just not helpful for us. Some wires that kind of connected somewhere in life are affecting me now, and they're not helping me. So I need to identify those and rewire them. You are not broken. Just needs a little bit of refiling, a little bit of rewiring sometimes. And we all have some that are just not helpful for us. We try not to operate, at least I don't try to operate from like just a clear like A to B. This happened to you when you were 14, so that's why you think now, right? But just like hypothetically, at 14, you could put all this time and work and into effort into one sport that you really love. You don't make that team when you try out. That day, you may develop some type of core belief that I am not enough. That is wiring that is not productive or helpful for you. Take that one moment and now decide that I am not enough has created a negative core belief system for you, right? And if you don't identify and work on that, it stays with you throughout life. So self-doubt will show up, self-handicapping will show up, where you won't do all the work you may need to do so that you never have to really find out if you could do it or not, things like that. We identify that negative core belief, we challenge it, and we reframe it and rewire it. Because you are not broken. Your wires just got a little crossed because of some experiences in life, right?
Yeah.
You go through a divorce, you are not broken. But some of your wires are going to get a little crossed because that system was set up partly to be a husband, right? You spent this many years being that. So that system that you have, that software that you have up here was partly set up to do that. So now the role has changed. It's a little bit of rewiring, but it's still the same manual, still the same values in there. Just got to turn to a little different chapter and rewire some things a little differently because the circumstances have changed. You are not broken. Just need a little bit of rewiring, a little refiling. We all need it.
Yep. I want to turn the topic towards the kids aspect of things. I think that's one of the other things a lot of divorced dads struggle with from the divorce aspect. Forget leaving a relationship. Is your child, who, depending on the age, can be caught up in the middle of this, and sometimes it gets really, really bad. And there's the aspect of you're not with them every day anymore, right? And that can take an emotional toll. Do you want to talk a little bit around that and kind of some of the things that you've seen and things that can help in those situations?
This topic typically is a complicated one. And I'm always very, very honest with my clients. And I'm sure somewhere along the line, you and I have had this conversation where a therapist's job, part of our job is always to try to empathize with the client. And basically what empathy is you try to find an emotional state within you that somewhat matches the emotional state of what they're going through and kind of go there with them, right? Brene Brown's like a wonderful speaker, psychologist. And she talks about this idea. There's like a little video of it where sympathy is like looking down in like a well and your friend's down there and be like, ooh, that looks bad, buddy. Sorry. Empathy is going down in the well and sitting there with them and then waiting for them to come up and going up with them. There's a difference, right? It's finding that place, trying to go there. Typically, I've been doing this job long enough now where I think I have a pretty good feel to empathize with most things. Being a parent is not one of them, and I'll never pretend to be able to reach that place because I'm not a father, not yet at least, right? So that topic can get complicated because the theories still apply, right? The value of being a father, influencing your child, showing up as much as you can, control what you can, that all still applies. But obviously, you go from seeing them every day and them being in your life 24/7 to that shifting, it's going to have a major, major effect, right? I think the main thing there is like, you got to be kind to yourself. Like there's going to be some emotional distress there when that happens. That is part of it. There is, I'm quoting a lot of videos I've watched recently, but there is one that I was in. He was a poet, actually. It's tremendous. He did say it was talking about like responses to man up and how to move away from that mentality. And one of the things he says, and it kind of applies here, is like you cannot arm wrestle your way out of clinical depression. So something like this, something that's emotionally charged to this, you can't just arm wrestle your way out. There is no, oh, you don't have your kid around as much anymore, man up. That's not a solution to this problem, right? You got to be kind to yourself. You got to give yourself some grace and understand that a major, major shift has happened in your life, and a major, major part of your life, quite literally a reflection of you, is not in your life to the same capacity, and that's going to be emotionally complicated. So be kind to yourself. Allow yourself to navigate. People don't realize grief shows up in a lot of different ways. Grief is not just resigned for when somebody leaves this world. You can grieve a relationship. You can grieve the change in a relationship. You can grieve the change in your relationship with your child, right? They're still in your life. They're still here, but the relationship and how it was has shifted. You can grieve what it was like when you were there every single day, every single minute. That's very human. You got to lean into that a little bit and understand that's going to be part of it. Now, where the work is done is the thinking errors that might come in, right? About failing your child or not being enough for your child, stuff like that. Some of these cognitions may show up with a little more intensity in a circumstance like this. So we're going to look for those, identify those, try to reframe those in a more healthy way, get a healthier relationship with those thoughts. But emotionally, you got to give yourself a chance to lean into that and understand that that is a very normal, reasonable experience here. And you're allowed to grieve, even if they're right there in front of you. You are allowed to grieve. And I think that's a major, major part of this whole thing.
When you say like grief, like right there, when they're right there in front of you, like what would that look like? Like, is that just kind of like in a moment, like, or is that like somebody, crying in front of their kid?
It could be in the moment. It could be long term. I think I'd imagine, and again, this is one of those circumstances where this is more of just a therapeutic assumption rather than an actual knowing. But I'd imagine even like when a kid goes off to college, there is some grief that the parents experience, so grief can show up in many, many different ways. It is a shift in your relationship with them. They might not be as reliant, they're not knocking on the door at 6 a.m. They're not calling every day. There's a grief in that, right? A relationship and how it was has now shifted and changed, and it is a different thing now. So it could be right in front of a child. It could be a year down the road, a few years down the road. It could be complicated. It could be long lasting. Grief doesn't really have a rule book, right? They obviously talk about the 5 stages of grief. That helps people understand it to some degree. Not always, but a lot of times those stages will show up. The 5 stages being denial 1, not always in this order, by the way. And you don't always experience all of them. Some people jump in and out. Sometimes they go back. There's no perfect rule book for these things. But denial, which is what it sounds like, which is basically trying to just pretend something's not happening. Not so much pretend, but avoid.
Yep.
Anger, which is what it sounds like. Bargaining, which is basically like trying to make deals with the universe. If I do this, this, and this, you'll let my kid be in my life more. Trying to make trades, trying to make bargains.
Mm-hmm.
Depression or sadness is the 4th stage, and then 5th is acceptance. I would imagine, and not imagine, even just working with clients experiencing this, I know we have discussed them experiencing grief and feeling a sense of loss, even if that person, their kid or whatever, is still in their life, you can still feel that sense of loss and go through those stages. It's a perfectly reasonable thing. Therapy is not about silver lining, right? We have to acknowledge the difficult things. It's not just, well, it's not that bad. They're still in your life sometimes. That's not what this is about. We don't silver line things here, right? We acknowledge the difficulties. We just don't stay there. We acknowledge them. It's a very, very difficult thing to experience. We acknowledge that. We try to navigate that, right? We try to work through our values as a father still or as a mother still and still try to use those in life. It's just going to be a shift in that. And your emotional state is going to change with it. And that's reasonable.
Yeah, I think it's as you go through it, is so many, like once you have kids, there's this, you live for them. And when they're not there all the time, essentially a part of you feels like it's missing. And I think it's, you can almost use that time as time to, I think that, it's part of the emotions of going through it is, right? If we're talking about trying to redefine values or get back to those values or stick to those values, still do that. Not being around your kid, focusing on that, I think there can sometimes be an element of feeling almost like guilt in doing that stuff, whereas before your entire life was dedicated to this one human. It's not there for you X amount of days out of the week, and you have this time, and it's kind of like, well, used it for them before. Now it's kind of like, well, there can be this guilt of focusing on you. And I know there's different things. Like for me, I'll speak on my experience, was leveraging that time in other ways to still long-term contribute towards my kid. You know what I mean? Whatever the goal for myself and things like that. And I think that reframe is something that can be powerful as opposed to sitting and focusing on that pain. Because if we focus on what we feel all the time, we're focusing on that the entire time. That's all we're going to feel. We're not going to be productive. That's just that's my approach. I don't like not feeling productive. Sometimes I can feel fall.
Yes, and that's where the reframe of the distortion comes in, right? If you're not able to be around as much or be as present all the time because of circumstances, that does not take away your ability to be a great parent, a great father, a great mother. It just changes the circumstance of what it's going to look like, right?
Yeah.
But within that circumstance, you still get a choice to live through those values and what matters most to you as a father or as a mother, as a parent, right? You do get a choice on that. It's going to look different. The circumstances have shifted, but it has not taken away your ability to influence your child in a positive way. Sometimes that's one of the big distortions now, right? Is now I'm a bad father, right? Now I can't be there the way I want to. It might not look the same, obviously, but you can still show up in the way that you want to through your values, who you are when you're around them, what you do for them, your acts of service, things like that. Those things don't need to go away. It's just going to look different. And that's kind of where the grief comes in. It's grieving what it used to look like, what it used to be like. Normal, reasonable. But just because you're grieving, that does not mean you lose your ability to influence your child as positively as you can, to be the father or mother that you want to be for that child. You still have the ability to do that. You have not lost that.
Yeah.
Circumstances have shifted.
It's hard. It's a difficult transition. We're coming up on an hour. It doesn't even feel like it. Anything you want to add? Closing remarks, thoughts?
Closing remarks. I don't think I have anything too wildly profound to close it out, Sam. I think I'm glad you brought this topic to my attention. I told you, like, it's cool to brush off some of these things and talk about them more on like a macro level and the idea of what it looks like. And it's just so very, very important. I guess the closing thing is, like, just because a role has changed, what you are maybe has changed, just because a shift in life has changed, doesn't mean who you are is gone now. I think that's the best way to kind of tie all of this up. Who you are, what matters to you, the values that you live through come with you everywhere you go if you're intentional about it. So if you feel lost, if you have a big change going on, like big shift in life, you feel lost, you feel like your sense of self has been shaken up, come back to that anchor because it's always there. What matters to me most in life? What do I value most in life? And where can I find outlets for that? That doesn't have to leave just because a circumstance in life has changed. Maybe that's the best way to kind of tie this all up.
Yeah. And I think you can also look at it as, an opportunity to dive in on those values and find who you are, come back to that core sense of self. And that journey can be tumultuous for some people, it can be straightforward for others, but it's all in perspective of life at the end of the day.
Yes, it's a major opportunity and a really, really difficult obstacle, because it will, to some degree, a major life change like that typically does kind of create a little fuel to push us in a direction to start to look at these things and grow in these things again. I'm not saying, again, it's not a silver lining of like, well, at least you get to work on yourself now. But there is something to be said for finding opportunity and obstacle and looking for open doors, because they're there if you look. Confirmation bias is a very real thing. If you look, you will find. If you look for all the negative in it, it's all you'll find. It's all you'll see. But if you look for some of the positive in it, you can find that, and you can kind of springboard off of that. And like we said, rediscover who you are, not redefine. But you can rediscover who you are.
Yep. Cool. Well, I appreciate this, Ryan. Really.
It was a pleasure, Sam.
I butchered your name at the beginning. I apologize.
You're good. I played baseball growing up, and if I told you how many times they announced my last name wrong, it's wild. Don't worry about it.
Cool, man. Well, thanks again, and I'm sure this will at some point happen. Maybe again in another 6 months. So we'll see.
My pleasure, Sam. It was truly a pleasure.
All right, we'll see you, Ryan. Thanks again.